Hello and welcome to Responsible Government Contracting. This workshop is part one of a three-part series introducing government contracting. Today, Mr. Andy Bennett will discuss steps necessary to register to do business with the government. Thank you and find us on the web at nc-rgc.com.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining. Like Kelly said, today we're going to be talking about government contracting. My name is Andy, and we're going to be breaking this into three parts over the next month. Part one, we're going to talk about the registration, how to get your company set up, kind of a high level of what the government structure is. This is not going to be a civics lesson. This is not going to be, what we learned in school, but more practical. I'm going to base these workshops as if I'm talking to business owners, so I'm making the assumption you guys looking at it from that perspective. And if something does not make sense, or if I use an acronym that doesn't make sense, please stop me. This is not any benefit to me, just to talk to myself. So I do this so that we can break down this really big complex thing of government contracting, so that businesses can make benefit of those taxpayer dollars that are spent every year. So like I said, my name's Andy, and right now today we're going to start the three-part series. Part one is registration, part two is going to be research, how do you find the opportunities, and then part three is going to be how do you respond to those opportunities. So register, research, respond. Okay. I like to start with story time. So I'm going to give you two real quick little stories here. And one is just, we've been doing this for a while, guys. And I recently took a trip up the East Coast to, Philadelphia and DC and all this, and saw some of the actual red tape that the government has used for hundreds of years. And if you look real closely, right here, you can see some of that actual red tape that we've been putting on documents to do government work and public work for centuries now. So give yourself patience, have grace, give yourself patience, and understand this is complicated. We've been, there's lots of scabs in this world, lots of calluses built up. So have patience and understand that there's a lot of regulations that have built up over time. So don't expect to come in and know it. I've been doing this for about 22 years now, so it's taken a while, and I'm still learning things every single day. So don't expect to come in and know and everything just to make sense, because it is a challenging world. One thing that I will say, my career started as an Air Force officer, and I learned government acquisitions from that perspective. What I found out from the operational side early on, so what I found out early on is that there's a cycle that we're going to talk about today called the federal fiscal year, and money is spent on that cycle, every single 12-month cycle. And there are people that are important to that process. And if you understand that process, you can benefit from that understanding. So what I learned very, very quickly as an Air Force officer was around the July, August, September kind of time frame, contracting officers are starting to stress and worry about finishing out their budget. They want to finish and spend all of the money that they've been authorized for that 12-month period, for that fiscal year. I found out that if I did my homework and I did my research for what my troops, for what my airmen needed, if it was, safety equipment, or if it was, new computers, or whatever the equipment was that my folks needed to do their jobs, I would go out and do that research and find the exact, make my wish list. and find out where I could buy the equipment, where, what the price points were for the equipment, who was a registered vendor, an approved vendor. So I would do all of that homework beforehand, and I would have that unfunded request in my pocket, at all times, because I knew in that July, August, September timeframe, my unit's contracting officers were going to come around and say, hey, does anybody need anything? We've got $100,000. We have, $2,000. We have, $200,000, whatever that number was that they have to spend within that time frame. And I would say, yes, by the way, of course, I happen to have a list. And I would get my folks what they needed every single year because I was prepared going into that cycle. And other folks would be scrambling to find and, get their wish list together. But I already had my wish list because I understood this process. Now, the contracting officer still had to go through their due diligence. They still had to do all that stuff, but I was prepared in the time that they needed that action to be done. All right, so that's going to be kind of a theme for these workshops is understand the process, understand where you can fit in the process, and make sure that you're prepared for the next steps of that process. Okay, so as promised, here is your civics lesson for the week here. This is what we learned in school. We were taught, and it's accurate, that there are three branches of government. You've got Congress, that's the legislative branch. You've got the president, that's the executive branch there in the middle. And then you've got the Supreme Court, the judicial branch. That's great, but for the practical purposes, this is what we need to know. Congress approves the budget. So and you hear control the purse strings and all that kind of terminology. Congress controls the budget. So when you see a senator or a congressman or, a representative coming to your districts and, doing town halls and that kind of thing and being lobbied, so lobbyists talk to the congressman, that's what they're doing throughout the year. They're getting requirements and requests and needs and desires from their constituents all year long. And then they come together and they make a budget. All right. That budget is signed around the September timeframe. And if you've been watching the news, you'll hear about continuing resolutions and all that kind of thing. That's just when there's political turmoil and they kind of hit the pause button and they just, kick the can down the road. But typically, Congress will gather their requirements and then they'll work out the budget, the authorization in September, and then they'll hand over that authorization to the president on October 1st. And that's the budget. Okay, president, here's what you can go spend. The president then has to spend within those line items, within those categories, the money that Congress has authorized. So for that following 12 months, starting on October 1st, for that following 12 months, the president executes, executive branch, the president executes that budget. All right, so that's all of those agencies that are in blue there in the middle. Excuse me. So the cabinet officials, if you hear Department of Defense, Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture, all of those agencies and all of the subordinate agencies on that chain of command work for the president and take that budget that Congress has just authorized. And you can see across the bottom there, over here, and this is the total federal budget. You can see most of these are entitlements. So you have Health and Human Services, you have Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. All of those things are what we spend our money on as a government. About a third of that budget, actually just more than a third of that budget, everything over here is what we're talking about when we start talking about this acquisitions piece. So when we're talking about acquisitions and contracting, this is the section over on the right-hand side here that demonstrates what money are, what the budget is that we're contracting. It's not necessarily the Medicare, Medicaid stuff. It's just this budget that that's over on the right-hand side here. So it's not the 9 trillion, number here, but this is kind of representative of what we spend that money on. We're going to talk about acquisitions and we're going to talk about those different categories. I'm going to throw out a term called NAICS codes. I pronounce it NAICS. Some people say NIAC, some people say NICS, different pronunciations for the same thing. What it stands for is North American Industry Classification System, NAICS. We're going to come back to that later. That's going to be very, very important when we start doing the research section to match, what we do versus what they need. That is a list of hundreds and hundreds of 6-digit numbers that classify a soybean farmer from a janitor from a battleship builder. Those categories are how we can track how we're spending our money. And that's what the IRS uses. That's what the government uses for this acquisition stuff. So NAICS codes. This is kind of a snapshot of how that report peels out for last fiscal year. So you can see in blue here, manufacturing. We spent about a third of the budget on manufacturing over in this area here, about a third of the budget on professional services, this area over here. And then the balance is, cats and dogs, a mixed match of others. Now, I've been saying and kind of introducing this 12-month cycle. When I talk about, let me move the little thing out of the way here. When I talk about fiscal, I mean fiscal, not physical. So not like, a bodybuilder physical, but fiscal, financial year. The federal government fiscal year starts on October 1st and it goes through September 30th. So you can kind of see how this plays out in the colors on the right-hand side. So October 1st of 2023 was actually the first day of fiscal year 2024. And I left off the 4 here. I need to fix that. So 2020 fiscal year 2025 will start this October, and then it'll go through September 30th of 2025. That's important because of that story that I said at the top. That fiscal year defines when Congress gives the authorization. So the executive branch cannot carry over, they can't bank, they can't withhold money for the next year. They have to spend all of their budget within that 12-month period. And that's why over here on the left-hand side, each of these little peaks here, I can tell you when September is each year. And it's absolutely consistent. Each of these little ticks here is September of that year. And you see the ski slope that ensues. All right, the only thing that kind of was an outlier was COVID, but that was a different thing. The government is going to spend like crazy at the end of the fiscal year. I'll talk more about that. Let me kind of say it differently. Well, actually, let me pause that. I'll come into that in a little bit. All right, so now this is the people. These are the people that we typically deal with that I've found in the government space. Let me just make sure there's no questions. Okay. So when you're dealing with government folks and when you're starting to do outreach and have conversations and do sales with government folks, typically you're going to deal with the 4 legs of the table. And the more of these 4 legs of the table you speak with and interact with, the better, as long as you're doing it at the appropriate time. And I'll tell you more about that later. The finance people are after award. I put them on here because they are critical to generate the revenue to actually get the bills paid, but they're not in the decision-making loop. Before the contract is awarded, they're going to advise everybody else in this government process on how much money they have to spend. Well, you can do $1 million project because you have $1 million in the bank. It's illegal for the government. They actually have to have funds appropriated for contracts before they compete them. They're not authorized to just award contracts that they don't have money to spend. That's one of the reasons why I love government contracting, because they're good for it. You know that they have the money. Even now, I've been doing this for more than 2 decades, guys. Even now with my clients, on the first invoice for a new contract, I will still get on the phone with the finance team for that contract, for that new award on that first invoice and say, ma'am, sir, you know what? I want to just make sure that we're, formatting this invoice as you expect it to be, and that we're submitting our invoice in VCSS or wide area workflow or whatever the system is accurately, and we're using the right terminology and codes that you're expecting. Right. So I will make that connection mainly just for that first invoice so that it starts the cash flow smoothly. Because when I talk to, new folks, or I talk to clients about their experiences with government, 99 times out of 100, I will hear, Andy, government's great. Glad you're doing what you're doing, but they just slow pay, or it's impossible to get payment out of them, or it just takes so long to get the invoices done, whatever. Okay. What I hear when I listen to people say that is that they're not doing their invoicing correctly. Because that 30-day clock, net 30 or net 10, whatever the terms are that you have with government, that clock does not start until receipt of an acceptable invoice. So if the finance team rejects the invoice that you've submitted because it does not meet the criteria, you have not submitted the invoice the way they told you to submit it, then of course they're going to reject it. Let me say it differently. I'm a small business myself. I own my own company, and I use QuickBooks for my accounting system. And I have a CPA, and we do invoicing, and we do, payroll and all these kinds of things. I am not anywhere close to $9 trillion a year of revenue. Imagine running QuickBooks for a $9 trillion organization. It gets complicated. There are lots and lots of details, lots and lots of lines of accounting and issues and all this kind of stuff. You cannot just willy-nilly invoice the guy. You have to follow their process. You have to follow their rules. You have to do the formatting the way they're telling you to, because there are 7, 10, however many different invoicing systems. There is not just one QuickBooks for the federal government. There's wide area workflow, there's IPP, there's PI, there's VCSS. There's all these different invoicing systems, and each one is different. So make sure, like I said, make sure that you talk to and reach out to those finance people who are going to be defined in your contract on at least that first invoice, so you make sure you get paid. Next up is the commander. These folks are the ones in charge. I put the, commander, the pirate hat on here because I'm in Tampa and Gasparilla is a thing here. And what this person does is set the tone, set the direction for their organization. You can equate this person to like the CEO or the president of a commercial company. The difference is, if I'm sitting across the table from the president of a commercial company, that man or woman has the authority to make the decisions for their company. If they, want to do business with me and they want to start right there, they have the authority to make that commitment. They have signature authority and obligation authority for their company, for their organization. That's not the case in the government sector, in the public sector. The commander, just like the president on down, the president actually does not have the authority to buy a cup of coffee. It's crazy bonkers, I know, guys, but this is what it is. There are only certain people in the federal government that have the authorization, that have signature authority to obligate the government. Those are, well, I'll bury the lead there for a second. So it's not like a commercial company. The commander sets the direction. Guys, this is the direction. This is where we're going. These are the things that I want to focus on. These are the priorities. That's what the commander does. As the commander, as the boss, as the director, as that person in charge is talking, there are a bunch of end users, hard hat people listening that work for that commander. I'm gonna, bundle them, all those job titles into end user. That might be mission partner, that might be project manager, program manager, operations lead. Those are the operational people, the boots on the ground to get the work actually done. So as the boss, as the commander is giving direction, this is where we're going to go, the end users are thinking about how to break up and segment those broad directions into individual projects with specific requirements. Why is this important? Again, speaking to you as business people, business owners, how do you take advantage or how do you position yourself best when you're speaking with end users? They do not have buying authority. Some do at minimum levels, but that's smaller just for, transactional type stuff. But the end users are the ones that are defining the requirements. So and I like to use this one because it is clear. If I'm an end user and my folks need laptops, right? I need to buy some laptops. And I'm talking to you and you sell laptops. That's your business. But you sell Dell laptops. You don't sell HP laptops. That's your line of business. Okay. Well, when you're selling and pitching your stuff to this end user that you're talking to, you're making sure that this end user understands why your product or service is better than your competition. That's totally fair. That's reasonable. Don't buy them lunch, but you can talk to them and you can pitch them and sell to them. So if Dell is making if next year's Dell is a 15-inch monitor and your competition has a 14-inch monitor or whatever that differentiation is, make sure the end user understands that, because what can happen is that end user who defines the requirement says, I need 1,000 computers with at least a 15-inch monitor or greater. That defines the specification. That defines the requirement. So now when that contract goes out for bid, the requirement is a 15-inch monitor. So your competition that only sells a 14-inch monitor can't compete. They don't have a compliant response. So that is where the end user and that specification comes into play. If you're in manufacturing and you have a five-axis manufacturing device versus a three-axis manufacturing device, or you're an ISO 9000 certified, 9001 certified company versus whatever, those are the types of details, those are the types of specifications that you want to make sure the end users are aware of, because that may end up as a requirement in the statement of work. Okay. Saving the best for last here. Let me check questions, see if anybody has any questions so far. Okay. So saving the best for last year, the contracting officers. Contracting officers are the ones that have signature authority. The challenge is they are not the subject matter experts. The end users are the subject matter experts. They are the ones that know the specifications. The contracting officers know the regulations. They know the process. They know the competitive acquisitions process. They are the ones that are the referees. They're the officials. They're the gatekeepers for the competitive process. They're going to take the requirements from the end users, and they're going to go out to industry, companies, us, right, and make sure that everybody has a fair chance to compete. Two things. Contracting officers love, love, love small business. I'm going to talk more about that a lot. But the federal government contracting officer has to do a certain percentage of their work every single year with small businesses. The other thing, they are risk averse. These are typically not skydivers. These are not people that you will find out on, bungee jumping. These are risk averse people that like to do things very, very by the book. They do competition very, very clearly. There's a point in time in the competitive process that you do not reach out and talk to these people anymore, because it would be an unfair advantage. right? In this world, it's called OCI, official conflict of interest. So understanding that and understanding the motivations of each of these legs of the table gives you insight into what their objectives are when they come into the process. So the contracting officers are the ones that do the competitive process. Same thing said differently. The broad intent direction starts with the commander. The end users, project managers, those folks are listening and they break down the requirements into detail. End user sends those requirements, those needs statements over to the contracting officers, and then the contracting officers go through the acquisitions process. That wall is the gatekeeper between industry companies and the government is that contracting officer. Don't go around the contracting officer to the end user during the competition process. You can talk to the end user all day long before this actual competition process starts, all right, or way after, but don't mess around with that because you'll get excluded from competition. Same thing said differently. Okay, we've got a chat here. Let's see who the questions from. Yes, I will address I will show you guys where the recordings are in a second. Okay, so this is actually a snapshot from Air Force Institute of Technology, and this is how one military organization trains the government people on how to do this process, right? So we will talk about terminology and we will talk about some of the stuff, but from a broad process standpoint, this is how it works. Now, I mentioned small business. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is in federal government to either be or work with small businesses because that is a huge advantage because it's law that contracting officers have to do 23% of their budget every single year with small businesses. All right. So down here, if you look at that, total budget down here, it's actually such a big deal that there is no thing in the regulation that is called a large business. You're either a small business or an OTSB, an other than small business. That's how important of a thing this is. So about a quarter of the budget is mandated by law, not policy or regulation, by law that has to be spent on small businesses, awarded to small businesses. And then within that category, 5% with minority-owned companies, 5% with women-owned companies, 5%, which is a change, this just got updated, 5% with veteran-owned companies, and then 5% with hub zone, historically underutilized business zone. These are like economically depressed areas. So such a big deal here that contracting officers actually have special rules, special competitive rules that they can use when dealing with small businesses. And we're going to talk a lot about that in a minute here. Okay. The numbers behind this small business thing that I just told you based on last year. So October 1st of 2022 through September 30th of 2023, fiscal year 23, these are the numbers that are associated with that spend. So $148 billion were awarded to total small businesses. About $20 billion with minority-owned companies, about $25 billion with woman-owned small businesses, about $30 billion with veteran-owned, and about $14 billion with hub zone. And if you are a business owner that is an African-American woman, you can actually qualify in multiple of these categories. 3 just from that description. So if you're a African-American female, you have to first be a small business. So you're going to fall into this total small business category. And then you're also going to fall into these top 2 categories here, minority owned and woman owned small business. And each contract can only have one of these set aside categories. So you can win contracts in any of the categories that you qualify and are certified in any of those small business categories. All right. So very big deal. I cannot emphasize that enough. Just be aware that that's a real thing. That's a real thing. Okay, let's go back to the cycle and let me use this to emphasize how big of a deal it is for the contracting officer to spend all of their budget by the end of the fiscal year. If you're this first guy over on the left and you forecasted, right, your budget for last year was $100, but come September 30th, you weren't able to spend it all. You didn't spend, you were under by 20%. This lady in the middle spent exactly what she said she would spend. She spent on budget to the penny. Okay. This guy over here on the right, he actually overspent his budget. He overspent by 20%. So he asked for $100 for his budget in the beginning of the year, and he overran by, $20. Well, what's going to happen next year when Congress gets, these requirements roll up to Congress? This guy's probably going to ask for $100 again. But guess what? Congress is going to say, we're not going to waste taxpayer dollars because now we lose that money. We're actually only going to give you what you were able to show you could spend last year. So now they have lost budget. They have reduced their budget by, $20, 20%, which is significant. Excuse me, this lady spent exactly what she said she was going to. So next year, she's going to ask for, and she's going to likely get what she asked for because she's proven herself consistent. These guys, and this is again where it's crazy bonkers sometimes in how public sector works, but these guys who overspent their budget are probably going to get a budget plus up, an increase next year. Because Congress is going to see that and say, wow, you guys had such a wildly popular program, or were so successful in outreach or whatever it was that the program was doing, that people loved it so much that you overran. Okay, got it. You guys are going to get a plus up next year. And I tell you guys, I promise you, I get contracting officers that'll join this call sometimes and they will roll laughing because they're like, Andy, you nailed it. Because this first contracting officer over on the left-hand side here is getting fired because their commander is not going to be happy that they've reduced their budget. These guys over here on the right-hand side are going to be like, yeah, woo! We just expanded our organization. We just grew. So that's a good thing. Totally opposite of what it is in commercial sector. First guy's getting a bonus because he still got the mission done, but he saved money. And then these guys are getting fired because they overran their budget. It's totally opposite from what it is in commercial. Okay, so now let me actually show you some of these websites. All right, let me pause for questions first and see if anybody has any questions. Either put it in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself, whichever you're more comfortable with. And I'll pause for a second here to see if you guys have any questions. Okay. All right, so now let's shift gears, like I said, and focus on how to actually register your company. If you are doing business today, you have already gotten, hopefully, you have already gotten a tax ID number. All right, so there are certain things that you have to do. You have to register with the Secretary of State for your state. You have to get a tax ID number, all of these things that you may or may not know that you need to do just by having a company. I'm going to show you that stuff, but then also what you need to do in addition to that for the government piece, right? The registration for the government piece. The first step typically is, some of this internal, you have to do articles of organization, articles of incorporation, that kind of thing. So the paperwork, you have to do that on your own or have an attorney to do that with you. But you have to register with Secretary of State in your state. In Florida, it's SunBiz. So that's why this little screenshot here, this is what it looks like. So SunBiz. You can just do a Google search or you can go to this website here. This is the National Association of Secretaries of State. This is not the Secretary of State that sits in Washington, D.C. This is the Florida, this is the Georgia, Texas, California, Hawaii. This is your state's Secretary of State. You're going to register with that entity, with the Secretary of State for your state, and pay them money. This is the only step in the process that you have to pay money. Hear me. This is the only thing you have to. There are people like me that will help you through this process that you can, retain their services and pay them money to do it for you. But you can do all of this for free, except for this first step. In the state of Florida, it's like $125, somewhere around there, once a year for the renewal. I think Texas is like $300. Each state sets that number themselves, but that's the registration fee for the state. That's the only thing you have to pay for. The next thing is getting a tax ID number. Louisiana, you do those steps in reverse, but every other state that I've come across, you do them in the sequence that I'm telling you. The IRS site, to get your tax ID, employer identification number, tax identification number, that is the first time you're going to need that NAICS code. I'm going to show you what that looks like here in a second. I'm going to show you a website that'll help out with that. Because that's how, again, the IRS can say, well, you're a farmer, or you're a manufacturer, or you're a lawyer, or you're a janitor, or you're a CPA. Whatever your industry is, you pick your primary NAICS code and you tell the IRS, and that helps them kind of keep track of how many businesses there are. So they're going to give you a tax ID number. You do not, you used to, but you do not have to register with Dun & Bradstreet anymore. You can, if you look for, just do a Google search for Dun & Bradstreet for government contracting or for federal business, something like that, or just go to this website, and you can get the Dun & Bradstreet number for free. Understand that Dun & Bradstreet is a third-party company. They are a for-profit, check me on that. I believe they're a for-profit entity, but they will charge you to do credit reporting for your company, for your business. You do not have, if you choose to, go for it, but you do not have to do that anymore. That is not a requirement for government acquisitions. What you do have to register with is this login.gov. You will use this a bunch, and it is going to feel intrusive. So just make sure you go to a website and make sure it looks like this. That's why I put the screenshots here, because there's lots of websites that look very, very convincing, but make sure you go to the one that looks like this and set up a new account. It's going to ask you for a picture of your driver's license. It's going to ask you for to do an authenticator, some sort of multi-factor authentication. And that's normal. That's expected, right? Because this is how you're going to get access to some of these other sites that we're going to. So go ahead and set that up. Again, free. Next, you're going to go to sam.gov. And again, I'm going to show you what this site looks like. The first, the leftmost picture here, this one, here, there we go. All right, so this side over here is what the initial site is going to look like. And then when you get to the registration piece, this is what it's going to look like. All right, this is going to take a minute. You're going to want to set aside a couple hours to go through this, because yes, it will save progress, but I've seen a lot of people get hung up and have to start the process all over. Or just, I recommend, set aside some time in your schedule and get this done all at once. You're going to need the bank account, routing number, and account number for your business bank account. You're going to need your tax ID number. You're going to need the address. You're going to need all of the important information for your company. This is so that when you win contracts and you start to get paid, you start to generate invoices, they already have all of that stuff registered. They already have all of that vetting process worked out, because they don't want to get, there's lots of reasons for that, but they want to make sure that all of that is established up front. Okay. Points of contact on their website, on their everything. You need to know going in, lots of companies are using WeWork or co-working spaces, things like that, or PO boxes. You will not be allowed to use a post office box, so no PO boxes. If you get something like that, get a suite number. Make sure your address is a suite number, not a PO box. Sam has gone back and forth if they allow, like I know what regulations say, but in practice, they've gone back and forth if they allow co-working spaces or not. So what they're going to do is they're going to look up the address that you give them and check that against the United States Postal Service database. And if your business name does not show up with that address that you give them, then you're gonna get rejected. So if you just sign the lease or the agreement for that mailbox, and later that afternoon you go to do this registration, it's probably not gonna populate. Okay, so it'll ask you some questions, and that's okay, but just understand that that's one of the things. Um, and like I said before, just make sure I recommend going through this all at once. You will immediately get what's called a UEI, or a unique entity ID. It's a long sequence of numbers and letters, alphanumeric, and that's what replaced the Dun and Bradstreet number, the DUNS number. So that UEI, you're going to get that immediately. You will then get a series of emails from email addresses that look like this. So check your spam box and your junk folder periodically to make sure you're not missing these emails. Because if they have questions, if your physical address does not show up in the database, they're going to ask you, please provide documentation to verify that this is your actual company address. And if you don't respond to that email within 3 days, typically it's 3 days, then they're just going to move on to the next ones. And I mean, these are real human beings that are actually looking at this stuff. And if you don't respond, then they're going to reject you. The default is to reject you. Another thing to save you a couple of months here is on some of these previous sites, when you register with the Secretary of State for your state and you register with the IRS, make sure you're using the same name. Make sure you're using the same company name. I had a client one time who registered with the state. She goes by her middle name, but she put her first name on the state registration, and then with the SAM registration here, she put her middle name. So that was a mismatch, and that lost her 2 months. Actually, it was longer than that. So make sure you use, if you say if your company address is 123 Main Street and you spell out STREET on one of the databases, but you shorten it to ST period on some of the others, that may cause you a hangup. So you want to be absolutely consistent with punctuation, capitalization, spacing, all of that stuff on all of these different databases, because they're just going to match each other up. All right, so it's then again, you get the UEI. So let's go to, let me stop sharing here. Discard. Let me show you the actual websites here. All right, so the first one is nikes.com. I usually, I'll show you guys where we're going to put these on the website here in a second. All right, so nikes.com is just a good website. This is a company. I don't have any affiliation with them. I use this personally because it helps with, if I don't know what the Nikes code is. If I'm a janitor, I'm going to click on this little Nike search up here, and I'm just going to play with it. I'm just going to Google search, and let's say I'm a janitor. So I'm just going to type in janitor and hit search and see what comes up. All right, so now I know that there are some options for my Nikes code. I'm probably going to pick 561720 because that seems to match pretty closely. I may consider some of these others. When we go to the SAM profile, you can pick more than one. For the IRS, you have to pick one, but for the SAM profile, I recommend usually 5, not more than 10, because if you do, 200 Nikes codes, you don't know what you want to do when you grow up, right? You're trying to be too many things, and contracting officers see right through that. So if I'm a janitor, I may list all of these 4 plus maybe a couple of others, just so I'm representing. I'm working with a company right now that I'm not going to tell you who they are. They have on their SAM profile, they only have one NICE code, and that NICE code is research and development. And they have gotten all of these research and development contracts. Great, congratulations. And they talked to me and they're like, Andy, why are we not getting any production? Why are we not getting any like manufacturing contracts? Why are we not, bridging that, crossing over from research and development to actually manufacturing? Like, well, guys, you're representing to the world that you're only a research and development company, so that is what they're giving you. That's what they're awarding you. So you kind of have to make sure you're representing yourself, on these profiles, how you want to be seen. All right, yeah, so I'm going to show you, let me show you this one real quick. This is sam.gov. I showed you that site before. This is sam.gov. We have a few more minutes here, so I'm going to walk you through a little bit so you can actually see what it looks like. When I come here, I'm already going to have my bank information. I'm already going to have a bank account set up. I'm already going to have a headquarters address set up. I'm already going to have my company registered with the tax ID number with the IRS. I'm already going to have all of that stuff done, and I'm going to have it ready at my fingertips so that I can do this registration all at once. Then I'm going to come here. I'm going to click sign. Well, you don't have to click sign in yet. You can click sign in. It's going to go through a couple of questions here. This is the same thing that I showed you on that website before, secure.login.gov. If you don't have one yet, go ahead and create an account. I already have one, so I'm going to log in real quick. You don't get to know my password. My computer is verifying who I am. Okay. So I am going to now pull up my two-factor authentication. I use the Google Authenticator on my phone. You can pick a phone call, you can get a text message, you can use a Microsoft. There's a few different options for you, but this is just like using your bank. If you use mobile banking, they're going to do some sort of two-factor authentication. Same thing. They're just making sure you are who you are. Then you're going to log in. Now, mine looks a little bit different than yours, but this is what I do. So it's going to go to your workspace. I just like to go back to home. And again, you don't have to pay for secure login. You don't have to pay for any of this. As a public, it's a government site that you do not have to pay a subscription to get to. Right? So this is free. When I log in, I know I'm signed in because it gives me the option to sign out. I'm going to scroll down a little bit and I'm going to go down here where it says register your entity or get a UEI. I'm going to say get started. The government has done a great job updating this over the past 18, 24 months. So you're coming at this at a good time. And see, they're making sure that you know this also. Get it for free. If you have been in government before or you're coming back to it, this used to be CCR, ORCA, FedBizOps, then it was beta.sam.gov for a while. Now it's sam.gov. They've gone through all that transition, so this is where we are. There's a checklist. You can go through that. It's going to be all the same stuff that I just told you. And when you're ready, go ahead and get started. Now it's going to start asking you a bunch of questions. I'm going to show you a couple of them, but this is where it's going to start asking you a bunch of questions. Create a new entity. Read the questions. Don't get click happy. Make sure you're reading the question and answer the question that they're asking you. All right. I want to do business directly with the federal, not you are doing business. I want to do business with the government. Okay. So you can be shooting the moon here and say, yeah, I want to do business with the federal government. Sure. And I want to bid on contracts as a prime contractor. They even give you an option just browsing. So this is I put directly with and, as a prime. Who's requiring you to? you don't have to put anything. You can do because I wanted to or I decided on my own. That's totally fine. I failed to mention, but I want to make a plug here for the Apex accelerators. Take a note here. SBDC, Small Business Development Centers, SBDCs, and Apex accelerators. Apex is spelled, it's just right here. Apex, let me highlight the A. Apex accelerators. All right, if you've heard of PTAX, that's what it was before, but now it's Apex accelerators. These are folks that do, they will advise you on the kind of stuff that I'm talking about right now. They don't charge you, they will not charge you money for this. They will help you kind of guide you through this process as well. Okay, so let's say who required you, let's just say federal government. What's next? There's one thing that I actually want to show you. There's a couple things I want to show you here. This is the real website. All right, so you can do this and just get the UEI. I recommend going all the way and getting the cage code because that's what you're going to need to do some levels of actual contracting. So just, I recommend it takes a little bit longer, I think that's, go ahead and get it out of the way. I select the cage code. That will get you the UEI and the cage code. Excuse me. Are you registering? This is what I want to show you. Are you registering a government entity? I have had clients come to me and after they've gotten an award and said, why am I getting hung up on invoicing with my cage code? And I go back and I dig and I find out that they clicked yes here. Unless you are the city of Tampa, unless you are the state of Florida, unless you are, whatever county, state, government entity, the answer is no. You are a private, for-profit, or non-for-profit. You are a private company. You are not a government entity. Okay, because this is what it's asking. This is what I wanted to show you guys. Okay, so those are the things specifically that I wanted to show you guys. Thank you so much again. I appreciate your time today and look forward to you guys joining part 3. If you want to go to my site, you can see we have future workshops coming up on March. Part 2 is going to come up on March 20th, and then part 3 is going to come up on March 27th. So guys, I look forward to it and see you guys on future workshops.
Thank you for your time today. We hope this workshop was instructive and informative. Please find additional accredited courses and other support services on our website at nc-rgc.com